We got two subjects to talk about today, huh? So right over that way and up in the Sierras is a place called, and up there they have the Sequoia. It's also known as Sequoia National Park. And they have some of the largest trees in the world up there. They used to drive cars through some of them and that sort of thing, but most of those trees died not too long after they had the hole cut into them. But anyway, the reason I bring up that park is because they just had a huge wind event, a climate change wind event, 80 plus mile an hour sustained winds, which blew over 100 of the old growth sequoia trees. Why is that so bad? Hot today. Because of their size. The bigger and older the tree is, the bigger the crown. But at the bottom, it's still about the same footprint, just a little bigger. So it takes up a lot of CO2 and puts it down far down into the ground because the roots are so deep. And when you lose these big old growth trees, you lose a lot of carbon sink. Trees in the city, size matters. So if you have big street trees that have been there for about 100 years, they'll take up a lot of the exhaust CO2 and pollution that the city will produce. And so it's so important not to cut down the old growth, whether it be in the city or in the forest. Do not cut the oldest trees. Trim them, but don't cut them. So how much difference is bigger make? Well, if you plant in cities, the largest species you can get to grow in your city, that's 92% better than planting small ones. Because the small ones don't bring up enough. Hang on a minute. So one of the best things you can do in a city or urban environment is plant trees. The bigger the species, the better. You can't get any greener than that. That is the most green thing you can do in an urban environment, is plant native trees in your area and try and talk the homeowners into planting native undergrowth, ferns, whatever the flowers are they grow underneath the native trees. And that's a extremely good way of lowering your footprint. Just plant a tree once a year. So one other thing I wanted to talk about was another problem we have that's getting worse by the day. World record number of satellites launched on a single rocket. Old Musk, he launched over 143 satellites at one time. There are now over 3,000 working satellites in orbit. In 2020, 1,200 were put into orbit. Many people are sounding the alarm about this. Jonathan McDonald from Harvard, it's getting really crowded up there. We are seeing crowded areas in certain orbits, and the problem is that there's so many satellites now that there's a real fear that one will hit another one, maybe an outdated one that no longer works, and then starts hitting other satellites until you wipe out a huge section of satellites all at once, then come hurtling down through the atmosphere, and parts and pieces of this stuff will make it to Earth, and some of it is radioactive. That's why we're concerned. It has nothing to do with high tech or anything like that. It has to do with using our brain. Musk is saying, well, that's an easy fix. All we have to do is put them in very low Earth's orbit, and then they'll just, on their own, come down naturally. He actually said that. Now, the reason he's saying that is because some of these satellites are as small as a book. They're little tiny satellites now, about like this. And they do an amazing amount of work, but because the electronics is so small and everything, we can now make little tiny satellites. But the problem is still the same. We're overusing space. We need to get into further out orbits, and the more stuff you put up there, the harder it is going to be to fly anywhere out of orbit and into space. You might end up with a collision. So what they really need to do is put many satellites into one satellite. That way you can reduce the numbers and still get your information and stuff out. Maybe bigger than some satellites, but at least your numbers are lower, and there's less chance of a collision in space. You may think that's no big deal at all because, you know, who cares? It's not our problem. But what about security and looking for asteroid impactors and that kind of thing? Also telling jets how to fly and radar and all kinds of stuff. We rely on satellites so much more than you think, including your mobile phone. You couldn't have a phone unless you had all the satellites up to support it. And I don't mean going directly from the phone to the satellite, but relaying from place to place through satellites. So hopefully old Musk will come up with the 1001 satellites, and that way we can let the old ones die away and go and retrieve them so we don't end up being hit by something, and move on from there, continue on. I had kind of an interesting time last night. I was up at I got up about 12:30 and didn't get to bed until about 2:30 in the morning. And I went online to watch the live feeds. Wow. Girl, all I can say is just take it easy, calm down, and you'll make it. Everything will turn out all right, hopefully. And but think with a clear head. Always think with a clear head. Don't let emotions get you, because it'll just cause more trouble. I appreciate all the ups, the downs, the new subscribers, and until next time. Oh, and I also appreciate definitely the commenters.